All right, welcome in everyone. Kicking off another deep dive here. And today we're going to be looking at something that, well, we all use every day.
Right.
I mean, you're wearing it, I'm wearing it.
Yeah,
It's textiles, right?
absolutely.
But we're going even deeper than that.
Yeah,
And we're going to be looking at textile auxiliaries in 2025.
exactly.
And to help us do that, we have this report here, the Global Textile Auxiliaries Market Report 2025
Yeah.
from Cognitive Market Research. And we're really going to try to break this down so
Yeah.
you can understand this market.
Okay.
Because I think a lot of people,
It's kind of hidden in.
they don't realize how much
Yeah.
goes into these textiles, to get them
Right. It's kind of behind the scenes.
to look and feel the
Right,
way
now
they
it's-
do. So
Yeah, it's a whole world unto itself.
it is.
But it's one that has a huge impact on our daily lives.
Yeah. So to just jump right in, I mean, when we say textile auxiliaries, what are we even talking about?
So basically, they're chemicals, and they're used in every stage of textile processing. So you're talking about taking the raw fibers
Right.
and then, doing everything from prepping them to dyeing them, printing them,
Finishing.
finishing them. Yeah, all of
Yeah.
that, giving them those specific properties that we expect in our clothes and fabrics.
Right.
And it's a big market. I mean, in 2025, this report estimates that it's going to be worth about 900 and 284 million US dollars globally.
Wow. So that's almost $9.5 billion. That's huge.
It's a lot of money, and it's only going to get bigger.
Yeah, because they are predicting
Right.
significant growth in this market.
Exactly. By 2033, they're saying it could reach 13,304.19 million,
Okay.
which is a CAGR,
Okay.
a compound annual growth rate of 4.6%.
So steady growth. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
What do you think is driving this growth? What's really,
I think a lot of it, and this is something that comes up again and again in the report, is this push for sustainability in eco-friendly textile production. It's not just a trend anymore. It's becoming like a core part of how textiles are made. And this is coming from both consumers
right.
who are demanding these kinds of products
Absolutely.
and from regulations that are getting stricter.
Yeah.
So you're seeing a lot of innovation in terms of like bio-based dyes using stuff like agricultural waste
Oh, wow.
and finishing agents that use way less water.
Okay.
I mean, it's not just about, feeling good. There's actually some really cool stuff happening.
Yeah, some really cool technology
Yeah.
going into this. So
Yeah.
now, geographically speaking,
Yeah.
where are we seeing, the most activity in this market in 2025?
So the biggest player right now is North America. They've got over 37% of the global market share.
Okay.
And that translates to about 2,599.52 million US dollars in 2025.
Wow.
And they're expected to keep growing at a rate of about 3.7% through 2033.
So why is North America the leader?
Well, the report points to a few things. I mean, the U.S. fashion and apparel industry is huge.
Right.
And that alone is worth, over $2 billion,
Right.
2,051.02 million to be exact, with a growth rate of about 3.5%.
Okay.
But then you've also got Canada with its stricter environmental regulations,
Yeah.
and they're pushing demand for these, greener auxiliaries.
Yeah.
Their market's a bit smaller, 311.94 million,
Okay.
but they're growing a bit faster at 4.5%.
Okay. Yeah.
And then you can't forget about Mexico. They're also growing.
Right.
Their market's 236.56 million, growing at 4.2%.
So kind of across the board growth in North America.
Yeah, it's a combination of like a strong consumer market and then this push for more sustainable practices.
Right. Right. Makes sense.
Yeah.
What about Europe? Where do they stand?
Europe is the second largest market. They've got over 29% of the global share.
Okay.
In 2025, their market is estimated to be about 2,274.58 million US dollars.
Okay.
But their growth is a little bit slower, about 3%.
Okay. Are there any particular countries that stand out in Europe?
Germany's a big one. They're really focused on those high-performance textiles.
Right. Right.
So their market's about 450.37 million, growing at 3.2%.
Okay.
And then the UK's doing well, too. They've got a lot of advanced manufacturing going on.
Oh, wait.
Their market's 382.13 million, and they're growing at 3.8%.
Okay.
And then you've got, other countries like France, Italy, Russia.
Oh, yeah.
They're all kind of in that 2% growth range.
Okay. So Europe is a little bit more of a mixed bag.
Yeah, it seems like there's different things going on in each country.
Right. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, the report, Asia really seemed like a dynamic area.
Oh, yeah.
What's happening over there?
So the Asia-Pacific region, or APAC, they've got about 24% of the global market in 2025.
Okay.
And that's about $3,249.40 million US.
Okay.
But what's really interesting is that their growth rate is projected to be 6%
Wow.
from 2025 to 2033, and that's the highest of any region.
So they could be on track to overtake North America.
Potentially. Yeah, it's definitely something to watch.
Yeah.
So what's driving that growth? Well, China is a big part of it. Their market is massive.
Right.
1,364.75 million.
Okay.
And they're growing at 5.5%. And they're really starting to focus more on eco-friendly practices.
Okay.
But India is really the one to watch. I mean, their growth is incredible.
Yep.
Their market's 324.94 million, but they're growing at a rate of 7.9%.
Wow.
And then you've got South Korea with all their garment exports, and Japan, which has a very established textile industry. They're both doing well, too.
Okay, so APAC is really kind of a region to keep an eye on.
Absolutely.
What about the other regions like South America, the Middle East, and Africa?
So those regions have smaller market shares right now, but they're still growing.
Okay.
South America has a little over 4% of the global market, and that's about $352.79 million US.
Okay.
They're projected to grow at about 5.6%.
Yeah.
And Brazil and Argentina are the main players there. Brazil's really focusing on sustainability, and Argentina's got this expanding export market.
Okay, and what about the Middle East and Africa?
The Middle East has about 4% of the market,
Okay.
with the size of $371.36 million US, growing at 5.2%.
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia and Turkey are the big markets there.
Okay.
And then Africa has the smallest share, only about 2.2%,
Okay.
which translates to 436.35 million.
Okay.
But they're still projected to grow at a decent rate of 4.9%.
Okay.
South Africa and Nigeria are the ones to watch there. Especially Nigeria, they're really starting to demand more eco-friendly products.
Right. Okay, so it's really interesting to see all these different regions and how they're kind of developing at their own pace.
Yeah, they've all got their own unique situations going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what about the overall drivers of this market growth? What's really pushing this market forward?
Well, the most obvious one is just the fact that textile production is increasing globally.
Right.
I mean, people are buying more clothes,
Yeah.
more fabrics, and that means there's more demand for these auxiliaries.
Right, that makes sense.
But then there's also these environmental regulations,
Yeah.
which we've talked about a bit already.
Yeah.
They're really pushing for the development of these low-impact, biodegradable auxiliaries.
That's really driving innovation.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's kind of forcing the industry to find new solutions.
Right, right. No, what else?
Well, technology is a big factor. I mean,
Right.
there are all these advancements in textile processing and finishing,
Right.
and those are creating opportunities for new types of auxiliaries.
Okay.
So as textiles themselves evolve, so do the chemicals that are used to make them.
Right. So it's kind of this, this feedback loop of innovation.
Exactly.
Now, we've talked about a lot of positive things,
Yeah.
but are there any restraints? Are there things that are holding this market back?
Well, like we said, those environmental regulations can be a bit of a double-edged sword.
Okay.
I mean, they drive innovation,
Right.
but they also increase costs because manufacturers have to comply with all these rules.
Okay.
And sometimes, they might not be able to use certain chemicals that are effective but not so eco-friendly.
Right, right. So it's a balancing act.
Exactly.
Yeah, what else?
Well, there's also the issue of raw material costs.
Okay.
I mean, the prices of those base chemicals that go into making these auxiliaries can fluctuate a lot, and that can really impact the bottom line for manufacturers.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then there's the whole global supply chain issue.
Right.
I mean, we've seen how disruptions in the supply chain can affect all sorts of industries.
Yeah.
And the textile auxiliaries market is no different.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, looking ahead, what are some of the key trends that are going to be shaping this market in the future?
Well, this demand for eco-friendly and sustainable auxiliaries, that's not going away.
Right.
It's only going to get stronger.
Yeah.
And that's being driven by regulations, consumer awareness, and corporate social responsibility.
Yeah.
So you're going to see more and more bio-based, biodegradable, and less toxic solutions.
Okay, what about technology? I mean, we talked about how that's driving innovation, but how is that going to play out as a trend?
Well, you're seeing more and more digital technologies being used in textile processing, things like automation, smart manufacturing,
Right.
and even smart textiles themselves. And
Okay.
all of that is going to require even more advanced and specialized auxiliaries.
So the future is really in these kind of, these high-tech
Yeah, definitely.
auxiliaries.
It's going to be about finding those specific solutions that can integrate with these new technologies.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. Now let's get into the specifics of the different types of auxiliaries.
Okay.
What's the report tell us about how these different product segments are performing?
So the biggest segment right now is dyeing and printing agents.
Yeah.
And that makes sense because dyeing and printing are like the essential steps in textile manufacturing.
Right. Everyone wants their textiles to have colors and patterns.
Exactly. And those processes require a whole bunch of different chemicals.
Uh-huh.
Things like dispersing agents, leveling agents, fixatives.
Right.
And as long as people want vibrant and customized textiles,
Yeah.
those chemicals are going to be in high demand.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Now, the fastest growing segment is finishing agents.
Okay.
And that's because people are demanding more and more functional textiles.
Right, like all that performance wear.
Exactly, like wrinkle-free clothing, stain-resistant fabrics,
Right.
water-repellent materials, all of that.
Yeah.
So these finishing agents are what give textiles those special properties.
Okay.
And there's a lot of innovation happening in that area, especially when it comes to finding more sustainable and eco-friendly solutions.
Right. So it's not just about making textiles look good, it's about making them perform.
Exactly. And those behind-the-scenes chemicals are a big part of that.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Now, when it comes to how these auxiliaries are actually used,
Okay.
the biggest application segment is apparel.
Okay, so the clothes we wear.
Exactly. And that's because the apparel industry is just massive.
Right.
It covers everything from, the cheap stuff to the high-end designer clothes.
Yeah.
And all of those clothes require those specific properties that auxiliaries provide.
Right. Color fastness, texture, durability.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then there's also this rapidly growing segment of technical textiles.
Okay, so what are those?
So those are textiles that are used for more, functional purposes.
Okay.
So things like car parts, medical supplies, protective clothing,
Okay.
industrial materials, stuff like that.
Okay, so it's not just about fashion.
No, it's about using textiles for all sorts of different things.
Right. Okay, that's really interesting.
Yeah, and these technical textiles often require really specific and high-performance properties.
Right.
Things like durability, fire resistance, antimicrobial properties, moisture control.
Okay.
And again, auxiliaries play a big role in achieving those properties.
Right. So it's a whole other world of textiles that we don't always think about.
Yeah, but it's a really important one.
Absolutely. Now, finally, let's talk about the companies that are actually making these auxiliaries.
Okay.
What does the report say about the competitive landscape?
So it's a pretty competitive market with
Right.
a lot of different players.
Yeah.
And the key players are really focusing on sustainability and technological advancements.
Okay.
Because those are the areas where they can really differentiate themselves.
Right.
So you're seeing a lot of strategic partnerships, acquisitions, and research and development.
Yeah.
And there's also this emergence of bio-based and specialty auxiliaries,
Okay.
which is adding to the competition.
So it's a dynamic market.
Yeah, very much so.
Does the report mention any specific companies?
Yeah, they highlight a few,
Okay.
like Huntsman Corporation, Solvay, Dystar Singapore, Pete Ltd., and Archroma Limited.
Okay.
Those are some of the big global players.
Okay, so it's interesting to see how these companies are adapting and innovating.
Yeah, they have to if they want to stay ahead of the curve.
Right. Now, to kind of bring it all together,
Yeah.
what are the main takeaways from this deep dive into the textile auxiliaries market?
Well, I think the big thing is that this is a substantial and growing market,
Okay.
and it's being driven by this, global demand for sustainability and innovation in textiles.
Right.
And we're seeing that play out in different ways in different regions,
Yeah.
depending on their specific industrial focuses and regulations.
Right.
And then the product and application segments are also evolving
Right.
to meet these demands for, better performance and more eco-friendly solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, for our listeners out there, why should they care about this? What's the takeaway for them?
Well, I think this deep dive really shows how interconnected everything is.
Okay.
I mean, we all wear clothes, we use textiles in our homes,
Right.
and this market is a big part of making those textiles what they are.
Right.
So it's about understanding the forces that are shaping this industry, the economic growth, the environmental concerns, the technological advancements,
Right.
and how those things are all impacting the fabrics that we use every day.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point.
Yeah.
Now, one last thing for our listeners to consider.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about sustainability.
Yeah.
What do you think are some of the really innovative chemical solutions that are going to become mainstream in textile production in the next few years?
Mm.
And how might those innovations really change the fashion and manufacturing industries as we know them today?
That's a great question.
Yeah, something to think about.
Yeah, definitely something to ponder.
All right, well, that's all the time we have for today.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the textile auxiliaries market.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.
Sounds good.